My daughter-in-law Jess shoved me against the wall of the courthouse on University Avenue. She shouted that I was a pathetic old woman, an embarrassment to the family. She called me that right there, in front of lawyers in dark suits, court clerks and security guards. People rushed past with briefcases tucked under their arms, their heels clicking on the smooth, cold limestone floor, hurrying toward their hearings, and every single one of them stopped to stare. Jessica Morrison, my daughter-in-law, raised her voice as if she were in her own home in Forest Hill, as if I were just some obstacle in her way. She pointed her finger at me, those perfectly manicured nails painted a dark blood red, and repeated the same thing she had told me privately for years. But this time, she did it in public. This time, she wanted to humiliate me where it would hurt the most. My son, Mark, stood a few feet away, completely motionless. His hands were stuffed into the pockets of his expensive Bay Street suit, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't even look up when she pushed me. He didn't even say her name to make her stop. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I only felt the cold of the wall against my back, the weight of the stranger's gazes, the heavy silence that settled after she finished shouting. I took a deep breath and lowered my head. I let them think whatever they wanted. I let them believe I was that weak woman, that voiceless old lady, that mother who let herself be trampled because she had nowhere else to go. But inside, something changed. Something broke. And it wasn't my heart. It was the last thread of hope I had left, that this family still needed me, that I still mattered, that it was still worth it to remain silent. Jess knew nothing. Mark didn't either. Neither of them knew who I really was. And in that moment, as she continued to speak with contempt, and people started walking again, pretending they hadn't seen anything, I only thought one thing. Just one. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes they will know. I am 71 years old. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 30 years I was a justice of the Superior Court in this very building. But they never knew. I never told them. I preferred to just be mom, just Nan to the girls. Just that woman who made roast beef and Yorkshire pudding on Sundays and secretly e-transferred Mark money when he was having problems. That invisible woman who didn't deserve a seat at the table when there were important guests. I hid my identity as if it were a shameful secret. I concealed my achievements, my degrees from Osgood, my high-profile cases, everything. Because I thought that if I were less imposing, if I were smaller, quieter, simpler, then they would love me more. They would need me more. They would include me more. How wrong I was. Jess finished shouting and turned away. She walked toward the courthouse entrance with her heels clacking on the floor, her designer briefcase hanging from her shoulder with the arrogant confidence of someone who believes they have already won. Mark followed her without looking at me, without apologizing, without anything. I stayed there for a few more seconds. I took a deep breath. I adjusted the beige cardigan I was wearing, the one Jess always said made me look older. I ran my hand over my gray hair, the hair she suggested I dye because it gave a bad impression, and I walked toward the courthouse entrance, but I didn't enter through the main door. I didn't walk behind them. I didn't hide in a corner as they expected. I took the side hallway, the one only those of us who work here use, the one that leads directly to the private offices, to the deliberation rooms, to the robing rooms where we keep our robes. I crossed that hallway in silence. I nodded at Brenda, the trial coordinator, who has worked here for 20 years. She smiled at me. She asked if I was ready for today's matter. I told her yes, more than ready. I went into the robing room. I took off the beige cardigan. I took off the flat shoes that Jess said looked like something a poor lady would wear. I put on the black robe, the one hanging in the closet with my name embroidered inside, the one with the crimson sash of the Superior Court, Madam Justice Vance, courtroom 312. I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old, gray hair, wrinkles around my eyes, hands that trembled a little, not from fear, but from anticipation. I put on the glasses I only use for reading long documents. I adjusted the robe and I walked out. I walked down the long hallway that leads to courtroom 312, the one where the portraits of all the justices who have served here since 1950 are hung. My portrait is there, third painting from the left. But they never saw it. They never asked. They never cared. I reached the courtroom door. I pushed it slowly. The court constable held it open for me. Inside, people were already sitting. Lawyers, witnesses, family members, and in the first row on the right side, there she was, Jessica Morrison, sitting with her back straight, reviewing papers, talking quietly with her junior, confident, sure of herself, ready to win her case. Mark was sitting 2 rows behind her, just watching, waiting, still not imagining anything. I entered through the side door, the one that leads directly to the bench. I went up the 3 wooden steps. I sat in the high back chair, the one that has my name engraved on a small plaque on the back. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur of the room continued for a few more seconds, until someone looked up, until someone realized, until the silence began to spread like a wave. Jess still hadn't seen me. She was still reviewing her papers, talking, laughing softly with her junior, so focused on her own world that she didn't notice the entire room had stopped moving. Then the court clerk stood up. He cleared his throat, and he said aloud what everyone was waiting to hear. "All rise. The Honorable Madam Justice Eleanor Vance presiding." Jess looked up slowly, as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if the words made no sense. Her eyes scanned the room, searching, trying to understand, until they found me. She saw me sitting there, wearing the robe and sash, with my glasses in my hand, with the same face she had insulted 10 minutes earlier at the courthouse door. Her face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure, undiluted panic. Her mouth opened slightly, her hands dropped the papers she was holding. And for the first time in all the years I've known her, Jessica Morrison was speechless. I didn't smile. I didn't make any gesture. I just stared at her calmly, with the same calm I had maintained outside when she pushed me, when she insulted me, when she treated me like trash. Mark saw me too. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking his chair over. His face reflected something I had never seen before: fear, shame, complete confusion. But I didn't give them time to process. I didn't give them time to react. I picked up the wooden gavel that was on my right. I raised it, and I brought it down against the desk with a sharp bang that echoed throughout the room. "This court is in session." Everyone stood up. The whole room rose to its feet. Everyone except Jess. She was still sitting, paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me as if she were seeing a ghost. I kept my gaze fixed forward, professional, cold, exactly as I had done for 30 years, exactly as I should have done with them from the beginning. "This is case number 2025-037. Miss Jessica Morrison represents the plaintiff. Are you ready to proceed?" Silence. Jess didn't answer. She couldn't. She kept looking at me, as if the world had turned upside down. "Miss Morrison, I asked if you are ready to proceed." She blinked. She swallowed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken. "Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor." That same woman who called me a pathetic old woman 10 minutes ago was now calling me Your Honor. That same woman who pushed me against a wall was now trembling in front of me. And I, Eleanor Vance, 71 years old, Mark's mother, grandmother of 2 girls who barely know me, only thought one thing as I watched her crumble: it's just beginning. There was a time when I believed that being a mother was enough, that being a grandmother, a nan, was a gift. That my place in this family was secured simply by existing, by having given life, by having been there every time they needed me. But things don't work that way. Not when your children grow up and forget where they came from. Not when they marry people who turn them into strangers. Mark was born when I was 26 years old. His father, Robert, was a good man, hardworking, honest. He died of a heart attack when Mark was just 15 years old. I was left alone with a teenage son, with a house in Leaside we were still paying the mortgage on, with bills from Hydro and Enbridge that never stopped coming. But I didn't give up. I worked double shifts for years. I finished my LLB at Osgood Hall while Mark slept. I studied at the kitchen table until 3 a.m., with a stale cup of Timmy's next to me and textbooks scattered everywhere. I graduated with honors. I got a job at the Crown Attorney's office. I climbed the ranks. I was appointed to the Superior Court bench at 42 years old. I did everything for him, to give him a better life, so he could go to a good university, so he wouldn't lack for anything. And Mark succeeded. He graduated from U of T Law. He got a job on Bay Street. He started making money. A lot of money. I was proud. So proud it hurt. I looked at my son wearing expensive suits, driving a new BMW. eating at restaurants I had never been to. And I thought that everything had been worth it, that all those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Then he met Jess. The first time I saw her was at a Thanksgiving dinner in October. Mark brought her without warning. She arrived in a tight black dress, very high heels, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Contempt. She sat at my table. She looked around my house, my little Leaside bungalow, with an expression she couldn't completely hide, as if she were evaluating every old piece of furniture, every faded curtain, every chipped plate I had used for decades. I served her the dinner I had prepared, the Thanksgiving turkey I'd roasted, with stuffing, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Nothing fancy, nothing sophisticated, just homemade food made with love. Jess barely took 2 bites. She said it was delicious, but she was watching her figure. Mark didn't say anything. He just ate in silence while she talked about her work, her important clients, the cases she had won. That night, when they left, I heard Jess talking to Mark at the door. She wasn't yelling, but her voice was clear, cold. "Your mother lives in this tiny house? Can't you do something about that? It gives a bad impression, Mark. People will think you don't care about your own mother." Mark mumbled something I couldn't hear. But he didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. And I, standing on the other side of the door, my hands still wet from washing dishes, felt something break inside me. But I told myself it was just a first impression, that Jess was nervous, that things would get better over time, that she just needed to get to know me better. How naive I was. They got married 6 months later, a big, ostentatious wedding at the King Edward Hotel that cost over $100,000. I didn't give my opinion on anything. They didn't ask for my opinion. They just told me the date and the place. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, behind Jess's important friends, behind Mark's firm partners. Like just another guest, like someone who didn't really matter. After the wedding, things changed. Mark started visiting me less. The calls became shorter. The Sunday dinners we used to share gradually disappeared. There was always an excuse: work, travel, social commitments. And when he did come, Jess came with him. Always critical, always pointing out what was wrong with my house. The walls needed paint. The furniture was outdated, something from the 70s. The backyard was neglected. I should hire someone to help me. I should sell and move into a condo. I should. She never asked how I was. She never asked if I needed anything. She only pointed out my flaws as if they were obvious to everyone. Mark didn't say anything. He stayed sitting on the sofa, looking at his phone, nodding distractedly while she talked. And I smiled. I nodded. I thanked her for her advice, even though it hurt. Because I thought that if I showed myself to be docile, if I made myself small, if I didn't cause problems, then they would keep coming. Then I would still be a part of their lives. But each visit was worse than the last. Each comment more hurtful. Each silence from Mark heavier. Then the girls were born. Sophie first. 2 years later, Chloe. My granddaughters. 2 beautiful creatures with Mark's eyes and Robert's smile. I thought everything would change. I thought that being a nan would give me a new place in the family. A purpose, a reason for them to need me again. But Jess wouldn't let me see them. There was always a reason. The girls were sick. They had activities. They were tired. Jess preferred them to be with the other grandmother, her mother, who lived in a big house in Forest Hill with a pool and staff. I sent them gifts on their birthdays, dolls, books from Indigo, clothes that I chose carefully. I never received a thank you call. I never saw photos of them wearing what I had sent, just silence. One day, I plucked up the courage and asked Mark if I could take the girls to the park. Just a few hours, just to get to know them better, so they would know who their grandmother was. Mark was silent for a long moment. Then he said he would talk to Jess. That conversation never happened, or if it did, the answer was no, because he never mentioned it again. And I didn't insist, because I didn't want to be annoying. I didn't want to be the type of mother-in-law who causes problems. The years passed. I retired from the bench at 68 years old. 30 years of service, hundreds of cases, thousands of decisions that changed lives. But on the day of my retirement, Mark didn't go to the ceremony. He said he had an important motion. Jess didn't even respond to my message. I went home alone that afternoon with a commemorative plaque under my arm, with a bouquet of flowers my colleagues gave me, with a heart so heavy I could barely breathe. And there, sitting in my empty living room, looking at the walls Jess said needed paint, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them I had been a justice. I wouldn't tell them about my career. I wouldn't show them my achievements. Because if 30 years of work hadn't made Mark come to my retirement ceremony, then nothing would. I would just be Mom. Just Nan. Just that simple woman who lived in a small house and didn't bother too much. But that decision came with a price. Because the more invisible I made myself, the more they treated me as if I didn't exist. Family gatherings at Mark's house became frequent. Elegant dinners, birthday parties for the girls, gatherings with important friends. I was never invited. I found out by chance, from a photo on social media, from a comment Mark accidentally let slip. Once I showed up unannounced at one of those parties. It was Sophie's birthday. My granddaughter was turning 8 years old. I rang the doorbell with a gift in my hands, a storybook I had looked for in different Indigo stores for weeks. Jess opened the door. She looked me up and down. She wouldn't let me in. "Eleanor, I didn't know you were coming. This is just for close family and Sophie's friends from Branksome Hall." "I am family," I said. "I am her grandmother." Jess smiled. A cold smile, calculated. "Of course you are. But the child doesn't know you well. We don't want her to feel uncomfortable at her own party." She closed the door in my face. I stood there at the entrance with the gift in my hands, listening to the laughter coming from inside. Children's laughter, music, happiness, everything on the other side of that closed door. I walked back to my house. I didn't take an Uber. I didn't call anyone. I just walked all the way back to Leaside with the book under my arm and tears running down my face. That night, I wondered what I had done wrong. At what point did I lose my son? At what point did I stop mattering? But I found no answers, only a huge void that grew bigger every day. 2 more years passed. Things didn't get better. They got worse. Mark stopped visiting me completely. Phone calls were reduced to 1 every 2 months. 5-minute conversations where he asked if I was okay and I said yes, even though it wasn't true. Then, 6 months ago, I found something that changed everything. Something that woke me up from that silent nightmare I was living in. It was an accident. Mark came to my house because he needed some old documents I was keeping, his father's life insurance papers. He came in a hurry. He left his phone on the kitchen table while he searched in the study, and the phone lit up. It was a message. The screen lit up, and I accidentally saw what it said. It was from Jess. "I already spoke to the lawyer. We can have her found incapable in 6 months. The house is worth at least $1.8 million. We sell it and keep the money. She can go to a long-term care home. She won't even realize it." I read that message 3 times. 4, 5. The letters burned in my eyes as if they were made of fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move my fingers. I could only stand there staring at that illuminated screen. Those cold, calculated words that had just shattered what little was left of my world. Found incapable. The Ontario legal term for declaring someone incompetent, as if I were an object. As if at 71 years old I no longer had a mind of my own. As if I couldn't make my own decisions. As if I were a burden that had to be quickly and guiltlessly discarded. The house is worth $1.8 million. That house where I raised Mark, where I cried over Robert's death, where I spent whole nights studying to become a judge, where I kept every memory of my life. That house I paid for with my work, with my effort, with my own hands. They wanted to sell it, keep the money, and send me to a long-term care home as if I were trash. I heard Mark's footsteps returning from the study. I picked up the phone and put it exactly where it was. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I took a deep breath. And when he walked into the kitchen with the papers in his hand, I was pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. "Thanks, Mom. I have to go. Meeting in half an hour." "Of course, son. Drive safely." He kissed me on the forehead. A quick kiss, automatic, meaningless. He took his phone. He left. And I stayed there, standing in my kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring into the darkness, trying to process what I had read, trying to understand how my own son could do something like that, how he could plan my life without consulting me, without asking me, without even having the decency to look me in the eye. But I already knew the answer. Mark wasn't the son I raised. He wasn't the boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares. He wasn't the teenager who hugged me when he missed his father. That Mark had disappeared years ago, replaced by a man who only looked forward toward money, toward status, toward what Jess told him to look at. And Jess, that woman who entered my life like a silent storm and destroyed everything in her path. She was the architect of my pain, the one who whispered poison in my son's ear, the one who turned me into an enemy every time I opened my mouth. But there was something she didn't know, something Mark didn't know either. I wasn't a defenseless old woman who was going to let herself be trampled without doing anything. I wasn't a woman without resources, without intelligence, without power. For 30 years I was a justice. I resolved cases of estates, of fraud, of family manipulation. I saw children betraying parents, wives stealing from husbands, families destroying themselves over money, and I learned something fundamental. The law has teeth, and justice, when applied correctly, can change everything. The next morning I called my lawyer, David Cohen, a man I met 20 years ago when I presided over his case. He had been unjustly accused of fraud. The evidence was flimsy, the Crown was in a hurry. But I took the time to review every document, every testimony, and I discovered he was innocent. I acquitted him. I gave him a second chance, and he never forgot it. Every year on the date of the verdict, he sent me a card thanking me. Every Christmas I received a fruit basket with a handwritten note, and when I retired, he was one of the few who attended my ceremony. David answered my call on the second ring. "Madam Justice? What a surprise! How are you?" "I need your help, David. It's urgent." We met in his office that same afternoon. I told him everything. The message I had seen, the years of contempt, Jess's plan to have me found incapable. David listened in silence, taking notes, shaking his head in disapproval. When I finished, he put the pen down on the desk and looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much in his life. "Eleanor, this is serious, but we have options, and we have time. If they are going to try to have you found incapable, they will need medical evidence. They'll need a designated capacity assessor, testimonies. They can't do it overnight. I know, but I don't want to wait for them to try. I want to protect myself. I want that when the time comes, they don't have a chance." David nodded. "Then we're going to bulletproof you. Legally, medically, emotionally. We are going to get evaluations of your mental health, certificates of your cognitive capacity from the top assessors in the city. We are going to revise your will and your powers of attorney, and we are going to make sure that no one, absolutely no one, can touch you without your consent." That's what we did. For the following weeks, I underwent neurological evaluations, memory tests, complete psychological exams. The results were impeccable. My mind was completely sound. My decision-making capacity was intact. Any judge who reviewed those documents would conclude the same. There was no way to have me found incapable. David also revised my will. We completely rewrote it. Mark was still my heir, but with conditions. He could not sell the house without my express authorization. He could not make decisions about my personal care or property without my consent. He could not receive a single cent until I died. And if he tried to manipulate my will while I was alive, he would lose everything. I signed every document with a steady hand, without hesitation, without tears, because this was no longer about pain. This was about survival. But I didn't stop there. I started investigating. David hired a private investigator, a discreet man who had worked on similar cases. We asked him to follow Jess, to check her finances, her legal cases, her movements. And what we found was worse than I imagined. Jess had been diverting money from the firm she shared with Mark. Small amounts at first, $1,000 here, $2,000 there. But over time the sums grew. $20,000, $30,000, a total of $75,000 that disappeared into phantom accounts. Mark knew nothing, or pretended not to know. But the evidence was there. E-transfers, receipts, emails where Jess talked to her accountant about how to hide the money, how to disguise it as operating expenses. We also discovered that Jess had debts, many debts, credit cards with balances of $40,000, personal loans she hadn't paid, and worst of all, she had mortgaged the house where they lived in Forest Hill without Mark knowing. She forged his signature. She used the firm's papers to make it look legitimate. That woman was desperate. And my house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. That's why she wanted me found incapable. That's why she wanted to sell it fast, because she needed the money before everything collapsed. David organized all the documents into a thick folder. Proof of fraud, proof of forgery, proof of embezzlement. Enough to ruin Jess's career. Enough to get her into serious legal trouble. But I didn't want to use it yet. Not immediately. Because there was something else I wanted. Something more important than legal justice. I wanted them to know who I was. I wanted them to see me, really see me. Not as the annoying old woman who was cluttering up their perfect lives, but as the woman I had always been, the justice, the professional, the one who had resolved cases more complicated than any they had touched. David looked at me curiously when I told him my plan. "Are you sure, Eleanor? This can be risky. If they suspect something ahead of time, they could change their strategy." "I'm sure. Trust me, David. I know what I'm doing." And yes, I did know. Because I had spent 3 decades doing exactly this. Planning, strategizing, waiting for the perfect moment to act. David made some calls. He called his contacts at the courthouse on University. He asked about upcoming cases where Jess was involved as counsel, and he found one. A big case, important, one that Jess had been preparing for months. It was a commercial dispute, a company suing another for breach of contract. The amount at stake was $2 million. Jess represented the plaintiff, and she needed to win. Because if she lost, her reputation would be stained. Clients would start to doubt. And with the debts she had, she couldn't afford that luxury. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, a Tuesday morning, courtroom 312. David smiled when he told me. Guess who was assigned as the judge for that case? I smiled too, for the first time in months. A real smile, a smile that came from some deep place I thought was dead. "Tell me, Brenda, your former trial coordinator. She handles the assignments now. And when she saw the case, she thought you might be interested in coming back. Just this once, as a retired justice sitting pro tem, a special favor." "Brenda did that?" "She always thought the world of you, Madam Justice." And when I told her what was happening, without going into details, she understood. She said it would be an honor to have you back, even if just for a day. I accepted. Of course I accepted. Because this was more than a legal case. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment where everything would change. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I reviewed every document of the case, every argument, every legal precedent. I made sure I knew every detail better than the lawyers themselves. I also prepared myself emotionally, because I knew that when Jess saw me sitting in that chair, when Mark finally understood who his mother was, everything was going to explode. And I needed to be ready. I needed to be strong. I needed to remain calm, even if I was shaking inside. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, reviewing every word I would say, every gesture I would make. I thought of Robert, how proud he would be, how he would hug me and tell me I did the right thing. And I thought of Mark, the boy he was, the man he became. And I wondered if there was still anything left of the son I loved inside that stranger who planned to lock me up. At 6 a.m., I got up. I showered. I dressed in simple clothes. The beige cardigan, dark pants, flat shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they expected. Fragile, insignificant, invisible. I took an Uber to the courthouse. I arrived early. I stood outside, looking at that building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had made decisions that changed destinies, where I had been someone important. And then I saw them arrive. Mark first, with his gray suit, his leather briefcase, his serious face. And behind him, Jess, with her black dress, her high heels, that arrogant smile I knew so well. They didn't see me at first. They were walking fast, talking to each other. Jess was saying something about the case, about how she was going to destroy the opposing party, about how this triumph would open important doors for them. Then they saw me, and everything changed. Jess stopped abruptly when she saw me standing next to the courthouse entrance. Her eyes scanned me up and down with that contempt I knew so well. Mark looked away, uncomfortable, as he always did when he knew something was wrong but didn't want to confront it. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. As if I had no right to be in that public place. As if my mere presence were an offense. "Good morning, Jess." "Good morning, Mark." My voice came out calm, serene, exactly as I had practiced it. Mark mumbled a barely audible greeting. Jess didn't even respond. She just looked at me with those cold eyes that seemed to evaluate how long it would take her to get rid of me. "Do you have some paperwork here? Because if you need help with something legal, you can go somewhere else. We have an important hearing." I smiled. A small, controlled smile. "I know. Good luck with your case." Jess frowned, confused, probably wondering how I knew about her case, but I didn't give her time to ask. I turned around and started walking toward the entrance, and then it happened. Jess caught up to me in 3 steps. She grabbed my arm. Hard. Her fingers dug into my skin like claws. "Wait, why are you really here? Did you come to bother us? Did you come to make us look bad in front of important people?" Her voice rose in volume. People started turning around to look. Lawyers, clerks, security guards, all witnesses to what was about to happen. "Jess, let go of me. Please." "No, I want to know what you're doing here. You always show up where you're not called, always in the way, always ruining everything." She pushed me, not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make me stumble back against the wall. My back hit the cold limestone. The pain spread through my old bones. Mark was still standing there, 10 feet away, watching, doing nothing. "You're an embarrassment, Eleanor. A pathetic old woman who doesn't know when to disappear. Look at you, in those horrible clothes, with that unkempt hair. You're pitiful. You're pitiful to your own son. That's why we never invite you to anything. Because you embarrass us." The words came out of her mouth like poison, and each one stabbed me in the chest. But I didn't answer. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her, memorizing every detail of her face, every cruel gesture, because I knew that in a few minutes, all that would change. Jess let go of me with a final shove. She shook her hands as if she had just touched something dirty. Mark finally approached, but not to me, to her. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of complicity. "Let's go, Jess. We're going to be late." She nodded. She gave me one last look of contempt, and they both walked toward the courthouse entrance without looking back. I stayed there for a few more seconds, breathing, feeling the sting on my arm where her nails had dug in, feeling the pain in my back where the wall had met me, feeling every cell in my body scream for justice. Then I moved. Not through the main door, not behind them. I took the side hallway, the one only the justices used, the one that led directly to the private offices. Brenda was waiting for me. She hugged me as soon as she saw me. "Madam Justice, you're trembling. Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine, Brenda. Thank you for this. For everything." She took me to the robing room. She helped me take off the beige cardigan. She reached for the black robe hanging in the closet, the one with the crimson sash, with my name, Eleanor Vance, Justice. I put it on slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric, feeling something inside me wake up after years of being dormant. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was dignity. It was a reminder of who I had always been, who I still was, despite everything. Brenda looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We miss you here, Madam Justice. This place isn't the same without you. I missed you, too." I adjusted the robe. I put on my glasses. I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old. Gray hair. Wrinkles that told stories of pain and resilience. But also strength. Also wisdom. Also power. "I'm ready." Brenda walked me to the door of courtroom 312. Before I entered, she squeezed my hand. "Make them understand who you are, Your Honor. Make them see." "I will." I pushed the door open. The court constable greeted me with respect. He opened the way for me. And I entered that courtroom that I knew by heart, where I had spent thousands of hours, where I had changed lives with my decisions. The room was full. Jess was sitting in the first row, reviewing papers, talking with her junior. So confident, so sure of her victory. Mark was further back, alone, waiting, without imagining what was about to happen. I went up the 3 steps of the bench. I sat in the high-backed chair. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur of the room continued until someone looked up, until the silence began to spread like an oil stain. Jess still didn't see me, concentrated on her documents, in her perfect world that was about to collapse. The court clerk, Clark, stood up. He cleared his throat. "All rise. The Honorable Madam Justice Eleanor Vance presiding." And that's when Jess looked up. When she saw me. When her whole world stopped. Jess's face went through a dozen emotions in a matter of seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure panic. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The papers she was holding in her hands fell to the floor with a dry sound that echoed in the absolute silence of the room. Mark stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backward. His face had lost all color. He looked at me as if he was seeing a ghost, as if the world as he knew it had just broken into 1,000 pieces. I didn't say anything yet. I just observed them calmly, with the same serenity I had maintained for 30 years in this place, the same one I had used to face aggressive lawyers, lying witnesses, and impossible cases. The clerk spoke again, his voice cutting the heavy silence. "All rise to receive her honor." The whole room stood up, everyone except Jess. She was still sitting, paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her junior had to touch her shoulder twice before she finally reacted and stood up on trembling legs. "Good morning. Please be seated." My voice came out firm, clear, exactly as it should be. The room obeyed. The sound of bodies settling into chairs filled the space for a moment. I opened the folder in front of me. Case number 2025-037, Valley Construction Company versus Cedillo Urban Developments. Contractual dispute over breach of clauses. Amount claimed, $2 million. I looked up. Miss Jessica Morrison represents the plaintiff. Mr. Sharma represents the defendant. Are both parties present and ready to proceed? The defense lawyer, Mr. Sharma, answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Jess was still silent. Her junior nudged her discreetly. She blinked. She swallowed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. Yes. Excuse me, Miss Morrison. I didn't hear you. Are you ready to proceed? My tone was professional, neutral. Exactly the same one I used with any counsel. But my eyes looked directly at her, and she knew. She knew that I knew. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Yes, Your Honor. I am ready. Excellent. Then let us begin. Miss Morrison, present your opening arguments. Jess stood up. Her hands trembled as she collected the papers from the floor. Some fell again. Her junior bent down to help her. The entire room watched, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Everyone felt that something was out of place. Jess finally managed to stand in front of the bench. She took a deep breath. She tried to regain that arrogant confidence that characterized her, but she couldn't. Her voice came out insecure, choppy. Your Honor, my client, Valley Construction Company, signed a contract with Cedillo Urban Developments for a value of $5 million. I stopped her there. I raised my hand. Excuse me, counsel. According to the documents I have in front of me, the contract was for $5.5 million, not $5 million. Jess paled even more. She searched frantically among her papers. You are right, Your Honor. I made a mistake. $5.5 million. Continue. She tried to continue, but her concentration was shattered. She got the dates wrong. She mentioned incorrect clauses. She forgot fundamental details that any competent lawyer should know by heart in a case she had prepared for months. I corrected her every time, patiently, professionally, but also firmly, exactly as I would with any counsel who came unprepared to my courtroom. Mark was still sitting in the back. I saw him out of the corner of my eye. His head was in his hands. His world was collapsing. Everything he thought he knew about his mother, about his life, about reality itself, was falling apart. After 20 minutes of disastrous arguments, I stopped Jess. Miss Morrison, I see you are having difficulty presenting your arguments coherently. Do you need a recess? No, Your Honor. I can continue. Are you sure? Because if you are not properly prepared for this case, I can postpone the hearing. I saw the panic in her eyes. Postponing meant admitting incompetence. It meant her client would lose confidence. It meant the end of her reputation. I am prepared, Your Honor. Then I suggest you focus on the facts and stop wasting this court's time with basic errors. Yes, Your Honor. The humiliation on her face was evident. That woman who had called me a pathetic old woman less than an hour ago was now being reprimanded by me in front of a room full of professionals. That woman who had pushed me against a wall was now trembling under my gaze. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. This wasn't personal revenge. This was justice. This was showing them who I really was. Not the weak mother they thought, not the old woman who was in the way, but the respected professional, the justice who had earned her place with work and dedication. Jess finally finished her opening argument. She sat down, her face red with shame. Her junior whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead with an empty expression. Mr. Sharma, your opening arguments, please. The defense lawyer stood up. He presented his arguments clearly, organized, professionally. Everything Jess had failed to do. The difference was abysmal. When he finished, I reviewed my notes. I analyzed the documents, and then I said something I knew would destroy Jess. Miss Morrison, I have reviewed the documents you presented, and I note several inconsistencies. The dates on some of the contracts do not match the testimonies you mention. The amounts you are claiming are not backed up by the attached invoices, and there are 3 clauses that your argument directly contradicts. I paused. I looked at her directly. Can you explain these inconsistencies? Jess stood up awkwardly. She opened and closed her mouth several times. She searched desperately among her papers, but she had no answers, because the truth was that she had prepared the case halfway, confident in her ability to improvise, to manipulate, to win with arrogance instead of work. I would need to review my files, Your Honor. You should have reviewed your files before coming to my courtroom, Miss Morrison. This court does not tolerate professional negligence. The silence that followed was crushing. Everyone in the room knew what had just happened. Jessica Morrison, the arrogant lawyer who thought she was invincible, had just been exposed as incompetent by a judge who turned out to be her own mother-in-law. Mark suddenly got up. He almost ran out of the room. The door closed behind him with a dry bang. Jess watched him leave, and in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear. Because she knew that Mark had just understood everything. That his mother was not what he thought, and that his wife had just humiliated herself in front of the woman they planned to destroy. We will take a recess of 30 minutes. When we return, I expect both parties to be ready to proceed with professionalism. This hearing will resume at 11 a.m. I banged the gavel against the desk. The sound echoed in the room like thunder. Court is recessed. The room slowly emptied. Jess remained seated, motionless, with a lost gaze. Her junior tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. I stepped down from the bench. I walked toward my temporary office with my back straight and my head held high. Every step resonated in the empty hallway. And as I walked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power, dignity, and the absolute certainty that this was just beginning. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. I sat in the small office that Brenda had prepared for me, looking out the window toward the courthouse parking lot. From there, I could see Mark pacing next to his car, his phone glued to his ear. He gestured with his free hand. He ran his fingers through his hair. He looked desperate. Brenda came in with a cup of hot tea. "How do you feel, Madam Justice?" "Like I just woke up after sleeping for 30 years. She smiled sadly. "The whole courthouse is talking. No one can believe that you are Jessica Morrison's mother-in-law. Some of the younger lawyers didn't even know you had been on the bench here." I slowly drank the tea, feeling the warmth go down my throat. Outside, Mark had stopped pacing. Now he was sitting on the hood of his car with his head in his hands. Alone. Broken. A part of me wanted to go out, hug him, tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the part that had woken up when I read that message, knew this was necessary, that I couldn't continue being the mother who made herself small so they could feel big. Brenda approached the window and followed my gaze. "Do you think he knew who you were?" "No. Mark never asked about my job. He was never interested in knowing what I did when I wasn't with him. When he graduated from U of T, I was already a justice. But he was so busy building his own career on Bay Street that he never looked back. He never saw the woman who sacrificed everything so he could have that career. It must have hurt him a lot. It did hurt. For years. But now it doesn't hurt anymore. Now I only feel clarity. The clock chimed, marking 10:50. It was time to go back. Brenda helped me adjust the robe. I looked at myself one last time in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The eyes that looked back were no longer those of a broken woman, they were those of a justice, those of someone who had recovered her identity. I returned to the courtroom through the same side hallway. When I entered, everyone was already in their places. Jess had regained some composure. She had touched up her makeup, she had straightened her back. But her eyes still showed that barely contained panic. Mark had returned. He was sitting in the same place as before, but now he looked at me differently, no longer with indifference, now with something I couldn't completely decipher: astonishment, shame, fear. I went up to the bench. I sat down. I banged the gavel once. Court is back in session. Miss Morrison, you have the floor. I hope you use the recess to better organize your arguments. Jess stood up. This time, she carried a new folder that her junior had surely prepared during the recess. She took a deep breath and began to speak with more control than before. Your Honor, my client fulfilled all the obligations stipulated in the contract. They delivered the materials on the agreed dates. Payments were made according to the established schedule. However, the defendant did not fulfill its obligation to begin construction within the 90-day period, as established in Clause 7.3. Better, much better than before, but I had already reviewed the entire case during the recess. I knew every detail, every weak point in her argument. I listened to her for 15 minutes. I took notes, and when she finished, I started asking questions. Specific questions. Questions that any judge would ask in a case like this. Nothing personal, nothing outside of professional conduct. Miss Morrison, you mentioned that your client fulfilled all obligations. However, according to the testimony of the site engineer that appears on page 42 of the documents, there was a 3-week delay in the delivery of materials. Can you explain that discrepancy? I saw Jess frantically search for that page, how her hands trembled as she flipped through the sheets, how her confidence crumbled again. That delay was due to circumstances outside of my client's control, Your Honor. A problem with the supplier. Do you have documentation to support that statement? I would have to review. Miss Morrison, I remind you that this is a trial, not an informal meeting. You are expected to have all necessary documentation on hand. If you do not have it, state it clearly. I do not have that documentation at this moment, Your Honor. Then your argument that your client fulfilled all obligations remains unsupported. Continue with your other points. Jess's face turned red with shame, with contained rage. But she couldn't do anything. She was in my courtroom, under my rules, and the rules were the same for everyone. The defense lawyer, Mr. Sharma, took advantage of every one of Jess's mistakes. He presented solid evidence, verifiable testimonies, signed contracts that contradicted what she claimed. He was a competent professional facing someone who had relied too much on her arrogance. After 2 hours of hearing, I had enough information. Both parties had presented their cases. Now it was time to deliberate. We will take a recess of 1 hour. After that time, I will deliver my verdict. Court is recessed. I banged the gavel. The room began to empty. Jess remained seated, head bowed. Her junior spoke to her in a low voice, but she didn't seem to hear. Mark approached her. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Jess looked up and said something I couldn't hear. But I saw Mark shake his head, how he withdrew his hand, how for the first time in years he wasn't on her side. I returned to my office. David Cohen was waiting for me. He had been in the room throughout the hearing, sitting discreetly in the last row. Eleanor, you did it perfectly. Professional, impartial. No one can say you acted with favoritism or malice. I acted with nothing but the law, David, as I always did. I know. But I also know this must be difficult for you. It's your family. It was my family. Now I don't know what they are. David placed the thick folder with all the evidence we had collected on the desk. The fraud, the debts, the forged mortgage, everything. Are you going to use this? Not today. Today I'm just going to do my job as a judge. I'm going to deliver a verdict based on the evidence presented. Nothing more, nothing less. And after? We'll see after. But they need to know they can't keep playing games with me. That I'm not the defenseless old woman they thought. I spent that hour reviewing every document of the case again, taking notes, analyzing the arguments of both sides. And even though Jess was part of my family, even though every emotional fiber of my being wanted to punish her for all the harm she had done to me, my duty as a justice was more important. The evidence was clear. Jess's case had enormous holes, inconsistencies she couldn't explain, lack of crucial documentation. Her client had breached first, even though she insisted otherwise. I made my decision. I wrote it on 2 pages. Clear, substantiated, fair. When the clock struck 1:00 the afternoon, I returned to the courtroom. Everyone was already waiting. The silence was absolute. Jess had her fists clenched on the table. Mark was pale as a ghost. I sat down. I banged the gavel. I have carefully reviewed all the evidence presented by both parties. I have analyzed the testimonies, the contracts, and the attached documentation, and I have reached a conclusion. I paused. I looked directly at Jess. The plaintiff, represented by Miss Jessica Morrison, has failed to prove with sufficient evidence that the defendant breached the contract. On the contrary, the evidence presented by the defense demonstrates that it was the plaintiff who breached first by failing to deliver the materials within the established deadlines. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant. The claim is dismissed. The costs of the suit will be covered by the plaintiff. The bang of the gavel echoed like thunder in the silent room. Jess collapsed, literally. Her body bent over the table. Her junior had to hold her up. She had lost. And she hadn't just lost the case, she had lost her reputation. Because everyone in that room now knew she had been defeated by her own mother-in-law. The pathetic old woman she had humiliated that very morning. Mark had his hands over his face. His shoulders were shaking. And I, sitting in my judge's chair, my robe and my dignity intact, only felt one thing: peace. The room slowly emptied. The defense lawyer shook his client's hand with a smile of satisfaction. Assistants collected documents. Security guards opened the doors for people to leave. But Jess was still there, sitting, with her gaze lost somewhere on the wall. Mark finally approached her. He spoke to her in a low voice. He tried to take her arm to help her up, but Jess pulled away with a sharp movement. She stood up alone, swaying slightly on her high heels. Then she looked at me, directly. And in her eyes, I saw something beyond panic and shame. I saw pure hatred, unfiltered, unmasked. She walked toward the bench. Her junior tried to stop her, but she pulled free. She went up 2 of the 3 steps that separated her from me. The court constable took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. Jess stood there, looking up at me from below, her face contorted with rage. This was planned. You did it on purpose. You lied to us your whole life. You never told us you were a judge. Why? So you could humiliate me now? Her voice trembled, but not from fear. From the fury contained throughout the hearing that now exploded, free of all the control she had had to maintain in front of the witnesses. I didn't lie to anyone, Jess. You simply never asked. My son never wanted to know what I did for a living. You never showed interest in truly knowing me. You only cared that I was small, invisible, convenient. You're a manipulator. All this time, you pretended to be a weak old woman so we would drop our guard. I stood up slowly, without rushing. I looked down at her now. I didn't pretend to be weak. You assumed I was. There's a difference. And today, you didn't lose because I wanted revenge. You lost because you came unprepared, because you relied on your arrogance instead of your work. That defeat is entirely yours. Jess clenched her fists. For a moment, I thought she would try to hit me again. But the court constable moved closer, and she realized where she was, that she couldn't do anything anymore. This is not over. I'm going to appeal. I'm going to prove there was a conflict of interest. That you couldn't be a judge in a case where I was the lawyer. Go ahead. Appeal. But I warn you that the entire proceeding was recorded. Every word, every decision, and any justice who reviews this case will come to the same conclusion. You lost because your case was weak. Not because I was your mother-in-law. Jess walked down the steps. She walked toward the exit with quick steps. Her junior followed her, carrying all the folders. When she reached the door, she stopped. She turned around one last time. Mark deserves better than a mother like you. The words should have hurt me. A few months ago, they would have shattered me. But now, I just let them float in the air, weightless, powerless. Mark deserves a mother who doesn't have to hide to be loved, and a wife who doesn't manipulate him to get what she wants. But those are decisions he will have to make alone. Jess slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in the now empty room. Mark was still sitting in his spot, motionless, as if he couldn't decide what to do, where to go, who to believe. I stepped down from the bench. I took off the robe slowly, folding it carefully. Brenda appeared at the door. "Do you need anything, Madam Justice?" "No, thank you, Brenda. I'm done here." I walked toward the exit. I had to pass by Mark. When I reached him, he stood up. We looked at each other for the first time in years. Really looked, without Jess in between, without excuses, without lies. "Mom." His voice broke. I saw tears in his eyes, but I didn't stop. Not yet, because there were things that needed to be said, and this wasn't the time or the place. "Mark, when you're ready to talk, for real, you know where I live, in that little house in Leaside your wife is so ashamed of. In that house you plan to sell out from under me without asking." His face paled even more. How? How do you know that?" "I saw Jess's message on your phone 6 months ago, declaring me incapable, selling my house, putting me in a nursing home, all planned without my knowledge, without my consent." Mark recoiled as if I had hit him. It wasn't. She was just what, Mark? Planning my life without consulting me? Stealing my dignity? And you? Were you just going to allow it, without defending me? Without even asking me if I agreed?" He didn't answer. He dropped back into the chair, his hands covering his face. "I wanted to have this conversation at another time. I wanted to give you time to process everything you just discovered about me. But you need to know something right now. I am not the enemy. I never was. I was just a mother who loved her son so much. She made herself invisible so as not to inconvenience him, and that was my mistake. Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know you were a judge. I didn't know how important you were. I didn't know anything." "Exactly. You didn't know because you never asked. Because you assumed my life began and ended with being your mother. Because Jess convinced you I was a hindrance, and you believed her." I hung the robe over my arm. I took a step toward the door, but Mark stopped me. "What am I going to do now?" I turned to look at him. My son. The boy I had raised alone. The man he had become, and whom I no longer recognized. "You're going to decide, Mark. You're going to decide if you want to continue being the man who allows his wife to humiliate his mother, or if you want to get back some of the person you used to be. But that decision is yours, not mine. I can no longer make it for you." I left the courtroom. Brenda was waiting for me in the hallway with a sad smile. "You were incredible, Madam Justice. Everyone is talking about you, saying you are the same brilliant judge you always were." "I don't feel brilliant, Brenda. I feel tired." She hugged me, and for the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what had just happened, of what I had had to do, of how I had exposed my own family in front of strangers. But I also felt something else. I felt that I had recovered something I had lost years ago, my voice, my identity, my power. David was waiting for me in the lobby. When he saw me, he smiled. "Justice Vance, it was an honor to see you work again. Thank you, David. For everything. For helping me get here. What's next?" I took out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved for months, the one for a court reporter at the Globe and Mail. She had covered many of my cases when I was active. She knew my reputation. She answered on the third ring. "Justice Vance? I can't believe it's you. I thought you had fully retired." "I did, but today I came back for a special case, and I think I have a story that will interest you." I told her everything. Not with personal details, but with facts. A respected retired justice returning for a day. An arrogant lawyer who turns out to be her daughter-in-law. A hearing where professionalism overcame arrogance. A fair verdict, despite family ties. The reporter listened in silence. I could hear her pen scribbling notes on the other end of the line. "This is going on the front page tomorrow. It's exactly the kind of story people need to read. Just make sure it's accurate. I don't want unnecessary drama. Just the truth. The truth is dramatic enough on its own, Justice." I hung up. David looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about making this public?" "Completely sure, because if I don't do it, Jess is going to tell her version. She's going to say I was unfair, that I abused my power, that I persecuted her for revenge. And I'm not going to give her that opportunity. We left the courthouse together. The afternoon sun hit my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin. When I opened them, I saw Mark standing next to his car, alone. Jess was already gone. He looked at me from afar, as if he wanted to approach but didn't know how. I looked back at him, and then I turned and walked toward the Uber David had called. I had spent 30 years of my life putting Mark first, sacrificing myself, making myself small, hoping he would see me. But today, for the first time in decades, I put myself first. And it felt like freedom. The news was on the front page of the Globe and Mail the next morning. The headline was simple but forceful. Retired Justice returns to deliver justice in case involving DAUGHT-RINLAW as counsel. The photo accompanying the article was of me from my active years at the courthouse, wearing the robe and sash and that serious gaze I always used during hearings. The article was accurate, professional. It detailed my 30-year career as a justice, the important cases I had resolved, my impeccable reputation, and then it narrated what happened the day before. How Jessica Morrison had lost an important case in front of the judge, who turned out to be her mother-in-law. How the hearing had been recorded and reviewed by other legal experts, who confirmed that the entire proceeding was impartial and fair. The reporter had also gotten statements from lawyers who were present in the courtroom. They all agreed on the same thing. Miss Morrison had arrived unprepared. Her arguments had huge holes. The verdict was correct, based solely on the evidence presented. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Former colleagues, justices I had worked with, professors from Osgood Hall. Everyone called to congratulate me, to tell me they had missed me, to ask if I would consider coming back, even as a consultant. At 9 a.m., the phone at Mark's firm also started ringing. But those calls were very different. Clients asking why Jessica Morrison was still working there after such public humiliation. Partners worried about the firm's reputation. Young associates whispering in the hallways. David arrived at my house at 10 with another folder. This time it wasn't about the courthouse case. It was about something much more serious. "Eleanor, we need to talk about what we found. We can't wait any longer." He opened the folder on my kitchen table. Bank documents, transfers, emails, all the evidence of Jess's fraud. The $75,000 diverted from the firm, the hidden debts, the forged mortgage on Mark's house. And there's more. I spoke with a friend at the Law Society of Ontario. Jess has 3 formal complaints against her for malpractice. Cases where she didn't show up to hearings, clients she never called back, documents she never prepared. Does Mark know anything about this? I don't think so. I've reviewed everything, and it seems Jess managed the firm's finances alone. Mark signed whatever she put in front of him without checking. He trusted her completely. Until yesterday. Exactly. Until yesterday. My doorbell rang. David and I exchanged glances. I wasn't expecting visitors. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was Mark. He was standing at my entrance, the Globe and Mail folded under his arm. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his suit was wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. If he had slept at all. I opened the door slowly. "Mark." "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in and stopped when he saw David sitting at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out. His face turned pale. What is all this?" David started to gather the papers, but I stopped him. "Leave them, David. Mark has the right to know." My son approached the table. He looked at the documents, the numbers, the emails. He picked one up, then another. His hands started to tremble. This is from the firm. These are our accounts. "Why do you have this?" "Because I needed to protect myself, Mark. When I found out you planned to have me found incapable and sell my house, I hired David to investigate. And we found much more than we expected." Mark read in silence for several minutes. I watched as his expression changed from confusion to disbelief and then to pure horror. $75,000. She took $75,000. And this mortgage. My signature is here, but I never signed this. "It's forgery," David said softly. "Jess mortgaged your house without your consent. She used the money to pay her own debts." Mark slumped into a chair. He dropped the papers on the table as if they burned. I can't believe this. All this time, I thought we were building something together. I thought she loved me. I sat across from him. For the first time in years, we were alone, without Jess between us, without lies, without acting. Mark, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Whatever it is, Mom, did you really want to have me found incapable? Or was it all her idea? He looked up. Tears ran down his face. She said you were losing your memory, that you were forgetting things. That one day she found you confused on the street without remembering how you had gotten there. She said you were becoming dangerous to yourself, that it was for your own good. That never happened, Mark. Never. My mind is perfect. I have recent medical evaluations that prove it. Jess invented all that to convince you I was incapable. But why? Why would she do something like that? I showed him the documents of her debts. The expired loans, the threats of foreclosure, the calls from collectors. Because she needed money, desperately. And my house is worth $1, more million. It was her salvation. But to get it, she first had to get me out of the way. Mark put his hands to his head. His whole body trembled. My God, what have I done? I abandoned you. I left you alone. I allowed her to treat you like trash. And all this time, you are, a justice. A respected professional. A woman who sacrificed everything to give you a better life. Yes, Mark, that's what I am. Why did you never tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for being your mother. Not for being important, not for having a title, just for being me. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Silence filled the kitchen. David had stayed quiet, giving us space. Finally, Mark spoke in a hoarse voice. What are you going to do with all this? With the evidence of the fraud? The forgery? That decision is yours, Mark. You are her husband. You are her partner in the firm. If you present this evidence, Jess will lose her license to practice. She will probably face criminal charges. Your reputation will also suffer, because you are her partner. But if you don't do anything, she will continue to destroy everything she touches. I can't. I need time to think. You don't have much time. The Law Society auditors are already reviewing the firm because of the complaints against her. They will find the missing money eventually. It's better if you get ahead of it. Mark stood up. He walked to the window. He looked outside without really seeing anything. I loved her, Mom. Or I thought I loved her. Now I don't know what was real and what was a lie. I approached him. I put my hand on his shoulder. He felt thinner, more fragile than I remembered. Sometimes the people we love are not who we think they are. And accepting that hurts more than anything else. But you have to decide, son. Are you going to protect her, or are you going to protect yourself? Mark turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw the boy he had been. Scared, lost, seeking guidance. What would you do? I already made my decision. I protected myself. I defended myself. And I recovered my dignity. Now it's your turn to do the same. He nodded slowly. He took the documents from the table. He tucked them under his arm. I'm going to talk to the auditors. I'm going to hand over everything. And I'm going to divorce Jess. The words sounded firm, decisive. For the first time in years, my son was making a decision for himself. And the girls? I asked softly. The girls are going to meet their real grandmother. Their Nan. Not the tiny, pathetic woman Jess wanted you to be. The real woman. The judge. The fighter. Mark approached and hugged me. A long hug, tight, full of years of distance and regret. Forgive me, Mom, for everything. I hugged him back, feeling how something inside me, something that had been broken for so long, finally began to heal. 3 months later, my life was completely different. Mark presented all the evidence of the fraud to the Law Society of Ontario and to the corresponding authorities. Jess lost her license to practice. She faced charges for forgery and embezzlement. The firm had to temporarily close while the audits were carried out, but Mark managed to save it by completely separating himself from her and returning the stolen money with his own savings. The divorce was fast. Jess didn't fight. She had nothing to fight with. Her reputation was destroyed. Her debts pursued her. And worst of all, she had lost the control she had always had over Mark. I didn't attend any of the divorce hearings. Not because I didn't care, but because it was no longer my battle. It was Mark's, and he needed to face it alone. But what I did do was open the doors of my house. Literally. One Saturday afternoon, Mark arrived with Sophie and Chloe, my granddaughters. The first time I had seen them in over a year. Sophie was 10 years old now, Olivia 8. Two beautiful girls with curious eyes and shy smiles. "Girls, this is your grandmother, your Nan, the real one." Sophie looked at me with fascination. She had read the Globe and Mail article. Mark had shown it to her. "Were you really a judge, Nan? For real?" "I really was. For 30 years. And you decided who won and who lost?" I knelt down to their level. "Not exactly like that. I listened to both sides. I reviewed the evidence. And then I made the fairest decision according to the law." Chloe, the youngest, approached timidly. "Mommy always said you were, that you weren't important." I took her little hand in mine. "Your mommy was wrong about many things. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that now we can get to know each other. Would you like that?" Both nodded, and that day I baked cookies with them. I showed them photos of when Mark was a boy. I told them stories about their grandfather, Robert. I talked to them about cases I had resolved, adapting the stories to be appropriate for their age. And for the first time in years, my house was filled with laughter, with life, with real family. Mark stayed quiet most of the time, just watching, with tears in his eyes that he discreetly wiped away when he thought no one saw him. Before they left, he hugged me at the door. "Thank you, Mom, for not giving up, for being stronger than all of us put together." "I wasn't strong, Mark. I just stopped pretending to be weak." The following weeks turned into months, and slowly, we built something new. Mark came to dinner on Sundays with the girls. We talked, really talked, about his work, about his fears, about how to rebuild his life. I also started rebuilding mine. I agreed to give some lectures at Osgood Hall on judicial ethics, on how to maintain impartiality even in personally difficult situations. The students listened to me with respect, with admiration. I also agreed to work as a mediator in family dispute cases. It turned out that my personal experience had given me a unique perspective. I could see both sides, understand the pain of abandoned parents, and the confusion of manipulated children. David became a close friend. We had lunch together once a week. We talked about cases, about life, about second chances. One day, he said something I will never forget. "Eleanor, when I met you 20 years ago, you gave me my life back. Now, I feel honored to have helped you recover yours." Brenda also came back into my life. She retired from the courthouse, but we met for coffee. She told me gossip about the new judges. I told her about my granddaughters. And Jess. Well, Jess disappeared from our lives. I heard she moved to another city, that she was working on something that didn't require a law license. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing it, only a distant sadness for all the potential she had wasted due to greed and arrogance. 6 months after that day in the courthouse, I received an official letter. It was from the Ministry of the Attorney General. They were offering me a position as a senior advisory justice, a special position created specifically for me. I would only work 2 days a week. I would review complex cases. I would advise young judges. Mark was with me when I opened the letter. He read over my shoulder. "Are you going to accept?" I looked at the letter. Then I looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Mom. You've spent enough time living for others." I accepted the position. And the first day I returned to the courthouse, this time officially, and not just for a special case, I walked through those hallways with my head held high. I greeted old colleagues. I met the new ones. And I sat in my office with my name on the door. Justice Eleanor Vance, Senior Advisor. That afternoon, when I got home, I found a bouquet of flowers at my door. The card read, "Because it's never too late to bloom again. With love, Mark, Sophie, and Chloe." I sat in my living room, the same room where I had spent so many nights alone and broken, and I cried. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of liberation, of closure, of a new beginning. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation at the courthouse door, the years of silence and pain, the moment I decided that enough was enough. Jess's look when she saw me sitting in the judge's chair. And I thought about who I was now. No longer the invisible mother who made herself small to be loved. No longer the woman who hid her achievements like shameful secrets. Now I was simply Eleanor. Complete. Whole. Unapologetic. My phone rang. It was Sophie, on a video call. "Nan, can you help me with my homework? It's about the judicial system." "Of course, my love. Tell me what you need." As I explained the 3 branches of government to her, I smiled. Because this was what I had always wanted. Not to be feared for my title, not to be respected for my power, just to be known, to be seen, to be loved for who I really was. That night, before sleeping, I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old, gray hair, wrinkles that told stories, but also eyes that shone with renewed life, with recovered purpose. I spoke to myself softly, as I had done so many times in the dark days. But this time, the words were different. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I was a justice for 30 years. I raised my son alone. I survived abandonment. I survived betrayal. And I didn't just survive, I was reborn. My name is no longer just that of mother, that of mother-in-law, that of the old woman who is in the way. My name is mine again. And my story is just beginning.